I'm so glad you joined us today. Today's conversation was incredible. We have Dr. Jordan with us, and he really dropped a whole bunch of wisdom and nuggets for all of us that are in the church game or trying to learn or just trying to be educated. We talked about church politics. We talked about the condition of the church. We talked about church hurt. We talked about personal life. We talked about marriage. We talked about basically anything you could think of, and even including the one that is offended, the offense, the church that lives in strife with one another. And it's just so much good stuff. You cannot miss this. Now, this is a two-part series, so you cannot miss this podcast. Share, like, comment, and subscribe. As always, we thank you guys for the journey. And remember, we have a Patreon now. So if you want to partner with us for us to continue to do this, thank you so very much. And please enjoy this podcast. Welcome back, guys. Today we have a very special guest. He needs no introduction, but I would like to introduce him. He is what I would consider one of my closest mentors. I've learned so much from him. He's a friend, he's a colleague in ministry. Dr. William A. Jordan. He is a phenomenal pastor here in the area of Houston. Many years of ministry, and the founder of the Fellowship Church. And I am so honored that he's here today on Grounded Podcast. So why don't you let everybody know a little bit more about you, Pastor?
First of all, thank you for inviting me. Much love and respect to you. 30 years of preaching, 28 years of pastoring in total. I'm a part of the old guard now, I guess.
Nah, not really.
The middle-aged guard.
Yeah,
I'll take that.
Okay.
A native of Louisiana. We've been in Houston 21, 22 years now, so it's home now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to tonight.
Yeah, we're glad to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. So what area of Louisiana, for those that are watching from?
Alexandria, Louisiana, central Louisiana.
Okay.
Yeah.
How was life growing up, Pastor?
Simple and quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, simple and quiet. That's the life of an only child.
Oh,
Yeah. / introvert. So it's, a little different, but yet small town, everybody's cousins, uncle, aunt,
mm-hmm.
Not much happening at that time.
Mm-hmm.
School, church, family, So it's a good place to be from.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a good place to be from.
So what allowed you to have a desire to be in ministry? I mean, other than the calling of God over your life, but when did you know?
Oh, I had absolutely no desire at all. Absolutely. Man, all of my childhood, I heard, you're going to be a preacher. And, you're a kid
Yeah.
hearing that. And I didn't want to hear that. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
But probably around 17, 18, I felt that it was a calling, but at the same time, I'm a teenager, and that's not on my agenda.
Yeah, I was far from it, probably. Right?
Yeah, so as a kid, man, 18 years old, I'm a church kid, but I'm not theologically trained or grounded in certain areas. And so in my mind, I thought if I could do enough dirt and do enough wrong and do enough foolishness and sin, then God would say I can't use him because he's too dirty. And the opposite happened. The more foolishness I did trying to escape the call, the stronger the calling got.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's when he chose you. He elected you. He said, "No, I got plans for you."
yeah, I didn't want those plans. I wanted to go to school and be a U.S. Marine.
Yeah.
You know,
When
uh,
was your first sermon that you know, like when you felt the nudge of that?
my first sermon was August the 15th, 1993.
93. Wow.
It seemed like ages ago.
Wow.
Yeah, the Cosby Show, a different world. Cheers.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a different
A
era.
different world.
It was definitely a different world back then. You know, what's funny is like every problem was solved in within 28 minutes of the sitcom.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Everything
So,
was solved in 28 minutes.
absolutely. So yeah, it seemed like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
And man, several years ago when VCRs were still out, that's a long time ago.
Hmm.
I found the VHS of my first sermon. I said, Lord, those poor people suffered. Cause I'm like,
Nikki
yeah,
laughing back there.
yeah. I'm like, yeah. They loved me. But I think the issue is too, man, and I say this gingerly and respectfully. My then pastor, my home pastor, and I again, in case he sees this, um, but there was no training for me. It was literally I told him I was called to preach. He said to me, "This is July." He said to me, "Stand up before the church, good old Baptist church, and tell the church that you're called to preach." I did that, and he says the next month he'll preach his first sermon.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm literally like,
Trial by fire, right?
I don't know how to put a sermon together. And to be honest, he didn't teach me or train me. Um, I had a friend, a older mentor, who just said, "Listen, go buy this book and read it." And I literally put a sermon together. I mean, it wasn't exposition;
Hmm.
it was a topical
Hmm.
sermon. It
Very
wasn't,
topical.
yeah, it wasn't exposition. And man, which is why now I'm so big on, if someone says to me that they're called to preach, I'm going to entertain it. And I'll say, okay, we'll go pray about it and come back in 60 days. And some come back and some don't. And that's how we the fake and the real out. Because if you don't
Yeah.
if you don't come back, and even before you preach,
Hmm.
it may be 6 months to a year before you preach your first sermon, because I'm going to take you through a rigorous teaching process
That's right.
to make sure that when you stand, you're prepared, because now once you stand, you represent the kingdom, God, and now me as your father in the ministry. And I
Mm,
won't produce any trash.
that's right.
So that's why I'm so strenuous about that
Hmm.
training process, because I literally, church, good morning, I was called to preach. He's preaching his first sermon August 15th next month. And
Oh, wow.
is there a book I need to read?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a stickler for that.
And it shows, I mean, for those that don't know, I mean, I had a privilege to serve alongside you uh, back in a few years ago in 2007, 2008.
Yeah,
And I was given that opportunity. And, the funny is, like, we'll talk about how we met. We met, I was your mechanic. I was your,
absolutely, and still is.
I was your mechanic. And I remember you brought your car by referral, and ever since then, I always remember that you would sit there and wait on your car when you get it serviced, and you were always reading. You were reading something, always reading a
Yeah,
book, reading a Bible. You had a journal, had something in your hand. You were always reading, always reading. And I remember that. I don't remember the initiation of the dialogue or the conversation, but I said, I'm a preacher, bro. I go to church. I'm a preacher too. He's like, all right. And what you said, I do remember what you said though. She comes, you go, you should come see me. I remember that. And here is this Mexican boy working on your car, and you call me out to Fifth Ward, Lyons Avenue, established church. And there I am, sprinkled as the only cinnamon color in the crowd. But it was beautiful because I was never, ever forget how much love I received when I showed up. I remember everything from the armor bearers and the security team allowing me to come in, sit in your quarters, in your office, bringing me out. Literally everyone was engaged. It was the most incredible experience. And I
It was
mean,
an
talk about,
incredible sermon you preached.
I'm sorry?
It was an incredible sermon that you preached.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I remember that.
now probably if you weren't as good to preach the reception might have been as kind.
He said, all right, come through. And then he's like, all right, give this boy a shot. And I still remember this. It was so funny, but, and I have permission to say it because left an impression on my life. He was like, one of your staff, including, they said, man, this Mexican can preach. And I took it as like a joke, but I thought to myself, it's like I was shaking in my boots when I was in your congregation.
Because that was the first time that an Hispanic had been in our pulpit.
Oh, don't tell me I was the first
You were
one.
the first one.
Oh, wow.
And honestly, I think Dr.
Wow.
Joe Gregory in Fort Worth was the first Caucasian gentleman to preach in our pulpit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm felt so honored.
Yeah.
And ever since then, it engaged a relationship. I felt at home. I was given the invitation for an assignment to work in Fifth Ward. I love my city. I love Houston. I grew up over here. And what God was doing in Fifth Ward was, and still does, and what he's still doing in Fifth Ward is incredible. I do remember that I got called to a different assignment to a different church, and I had that talk with you in your office, and you not by one moment you didn't blink an eye, and you told me exactly. You said you got to take that. You said other words, but I'm not going to repeat that. But it was really.
Yeah, we can't say that on the podcast.
we know exactly what you said, and you said make sure they take care of you, make sure things are written right because I was going to a big church, and man, that's what we're going to initiate open up our dialogue on is the experience of the whole church process, the beauty, the good, the bad, the ugly, and I didn't know I signed up for that. I was just I was in love with the Lord, and I had communication ability and preaching ability, and I had seminary in Spanish, which was non-credited over here because everything was from Mexico. And I basically kind of just believed God for everything and just loved people. And I learned it by my parents, by my grandparents. And I said, you know what? This is a real deal. And whenever I was really going out of my league, I had never been in a African American church like that and be so loved. And then I get called to another assignment into a Caucasian church, a big one, multi-generational, multicultural, but the culture was totally different. And I didn't sign up for that. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And the experiences that, because I want you to put some input on that, Pastor.
Okay.
I mean, we want to talk about that. It's impressive that God will use us in every circumstance, but He really, really allows us to go through some stuff. He can prevent us not to go through it, but I'm so grateful that He allows us to go through it
Absolutely.
because we learn so much from it. And I would consider the point that we want to talk about is the current condition of our church, the climate of our church right now, where we at, what it was before, healthy, a lot of things that we were growing, but with the growth of social media, with the growth of so much stuff, divisiveness and information war and stuff like that, how the church has a condition. And I started seeing it from when I was there. And I will say I will not use the name of the church where I was at, but it is a mega church. But the cultural thing, I thought to myself, well, you hired me to do this job. You want me to lead this position. And they're like, yeah, absolutely. But we need you to be basically, you need to sit down and you need to stay quiet. And I was like, well, but I'm the executive pastor. And they're like, yeah, but you won't preach. You'll sit down and you're going to be the meet and greet guy and you're going to deal with everybody's counseling conditions and their situations and their prayer needs and all that, because you're an associate pastor of a extension of another church. And I was like, okay, so I'm a satellite pastor and here I am trying to deal with this. And they're like, but here's your budget. You're going to have to hire these people. You're going to have to fire if you have to. So all of a sudden, it's like, I didn't go to school I didn't know anything about executive. I didn't know anything about money, finances, especially on a corporate level for a church like that of that size. And here you are, they give me a church, a congregation of 1,000, and I'm trying to figure out. Here's this boy from Aldi, and I didn't know anything about that. But let's talk about that condition because I saw a lot of things that were helpful, but I also saw a lot of things that were like, wow, this is a corporation, this is a business, and I need to get on my, I got to get on my toes. Can you elaborate something about that? Something you may have experienced that, or what your intake would be on that?
I mean, church is ministry, and church is business, and it can be culturally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
One of the issues with, as we would say, the black church is that the black church had a hard time trying to move into that business phase. They were so spiritual. Everything was church, altar, but they were horrible at business because everything was, let's have a prayer service or let's just have worship.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, what about the business aspect? Uh, are we investing our money properly? Uh, are we saving money? The average, well, back then, Black Baptist Church didn't know about staff
Mm-hmm.
or didn't even want a staff.
Mm-hmm.
It was the pastor, the church secretary, the deacon chairman, if they had trustees, a trustee chairman, and the deacons. And that group itself, they pretty much ran everything.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it's cultural, you know. But to your initial comment, I think a lot has happened with church and COVID, post COVID, etc.
Oh yeah, for sure.
If we can say post COVID. Um, in my opinion, because I believe the Bible is the final authority, I think the church will always be okay because the church is built on Jesus Christ.
That's right.
The church will survive.
Mm-hmm.
Now the question is, will different ministries survive?
Mm-hmm.
The church will always be fine because the foundation of the church is Jesus Christ. The
Mm-hmm.
church will be fine. Will different ministries, local assemblies, will
Okay.
they survive?
Yeah.
Because if you're trying to do ministry now like you did it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you're not going to survive.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think even for a lot of us who pastored during COVID, we understood then we had to change how we do church.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of stuff that we were doing in church was a waste of time. It was time, it was fillers.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, so again, black Baptists at the time, Why we're here 2.5 hours? Why?
Hmm.
I mean, is it the move of the Holy Ghost, or we're just doing a whole bunch of stuff that just we're just literally making up stuff? Does the choir have to sing 2 or 3 songs every Sunday? Do we have to have announcements every Sunday? Do we have to have a program in our hand every Sunday?
Yeah.
So post COVID made me realize we can do church in an hour and 15, 30 minutes. And God can still manifest himself among us.
I agree.
But if you think that people have the attention span for 2.5 hours in this day and time, your church won't survive.
I think we totally agree with
Yeah,
that.
it's not going to survive. I mean, you think about it. You mentioned 28 minutes problem solved. You think about TV.
Mhm.
Growing up as a kid, my grandmother liked westerns. That was every Saturday. She would watch westerns all Saturday. Gunsmoke was one of her favorites. Matt Dillon, Deputy Festus. Guess what? They chased the same two people the
Yes, they
whole
did.
hour. The whole hour.
Yes, they
But
did.
now, when you have a show today, what's the SVU,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
CSI.
CSI.
It's literally 3 different storylines in 60 minutes. And you know why? Because people can't focus on one storyline for 1 hour. They need to see something different.
Mhm.
Okay, Horatio Kane, this is his issue. Then the other guy, this is because people they can't focus. They can't focus. When I was a kid with a black mama, bruh, from the choir stand, you go to the restroom and you get some water before church starts. You spit that gum out and you sit your behind down. And if I have to come out of this choir stand, it's going to be a problem. I understood that as a kid. I don't like pain.
I don't like the pain.
Yeah. But now you have kids in church, man, they got to have Cheez Its, gummy bears,
And
phones,
iPads.
iPads,
Yeah.
passing them around because I, kids are even different today.
Mm-hmm. Wonder what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, kids are different today. So the church will be fine, but we have to change how we do church. And unfortunately, when you start talking about mega churches and churches, you talk about board of directors and elder boards, et cetera, et cetera. And it becomes political.
Super political. That's my next take.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it becomes political. Who you know, if this one likes you, you get the promotion. If you make this one mad, you get the notion, you get fired. And most of it is not bathed in prayer. It's who likes me. Who did I tick off?
Mm. Do you believe that, like, there was a recent study that churches now are based on the cultural and the new church, the new norm, because of the celebrity pastor model and all that stuff that was going around. It's based on personality for the keynote speaker or the pastor. He don't necessarily have to meet the qualifications as a shepherd, as the scripture would say.
I think some are, but the problem with personality driven churches is when he dies, the church will die.
Absolutely.
When she dies, the church will die. Um, I think one of the clearest examples of a church being a machine, I hate to use that vernacular, but Willow Avenue Baptist Church in Third Ward. Dr. William Lawson built that church um, 60 plus years ago on the campus of TSU, not far from TSU, with maybe 14, 15 people.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it, by the grace of God, it grew to now probably he's with the Lord now. But when he retired and Dr. Cosby took over, maybe like at 4,000 members,
That's
and
that's
now they're
incredible.
probably boasting 16,000.
Hmm.
and they just built a brand new sanctuary a couple years ago that seats like 2,500 people, and Doc cut it down because he was coming out of COVID. It was supposed to be bigger, and
Mm.
now the sanctuary is full. The overflow is full. Now you have people in the old sanctuary in overflow.
Dang.
But at the same time, you have some churches that are machines that, regardless of who's the pastor, this is just the place we come into. And then you have some, if he's not preaching, I'm not staying.
Yeah.
If I come in, I don't see his car, I'm gonna keep on driving.
Wow.
And at one of my assignments, I won't say which one, at one of my assignments, they knew I would come in around 8:35. And if it was 8:40, when I've been coming to church, I'd have people texting me, "Where are you?" "I'm in Chicago." "Okay, well, I'll see you when you get back." Or if I went on vacation, they would say, "Okay, we're on vacation. We'll see you when you get back because we going when."
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they would literally not come to church. And I remember once I had either the flu or pneumonia, and I was out for maybe a month, because it was really bad. And my best friend at that time was my assistant, and she was doing media as well. And she's like, "Hey, man, I know you're sick, but you're gonna have to let me tap you in on the phone to greet these people." So I do that, and I say, "Listen, church, I know I've been ill. I'm back in the pulpit Sunday." Well, I had a relapse
Mm.
of pneumonia. She says to me via text message, "This place is jam packed, and you back in the bed."
Oh, wow.
And it was the same thing. Paz had a relapse. Literally walked out of church. Some of them walked out during worship.
Wow.
It's unhealthy.
How would you correct that, Pastor? How? I mean,
You
we're talking
you
about the current condition. How would you do that?
you just I think you try to make people, number one, have a fresh appreciation for the gospel and for preaching.
Mm.
Now, let me say this. If you aren't preaching, and as they would say in my culture, and if you can't preach, then we understand why they walking out, because you're producing garbage. And sheep eat grass, they don't eat slop.
Mhm.
Now, with that being said, you have to try to raise your people up to appreciate the art of
Yes.
preaching.
I've heard it from you first. The art of preaching. Elaborate.
The art of preaching is that we all, well, those of us who are called, studious, pray, have a good prayer life, we're called to preach. We apply ourselves, we study, we write, but at the same time, we're different people. We approach the text different.
Mhm.
You may approach the text from your cultural standpoint.
Right.
I approach the text as a Black man living in America, probably pastoring in a lower income neighborhood.
Mhm.
So, how does this text apply to the people that I preach to? Because what I preach in Fifth Ward won't apply to the people who I preach to in the Woodlands or
100%.
in Cypress. Two different social economic. Well, the gospel is the gospel. We understand that. But if I'm preaching and I'm saying to my people, Jesus will make a way. If you give him your fish and loaves, he can multiply it. Well, guess what? they're going to receive that and hang on to that. You know why? They don't have a job. Or they get child support and Social Security. Or if you're elderly, one check a month. So I'm on limited income. So hearing that will make me gravitate toward it. I'm preaching in the Woodlands. That ain't gonna move those people. They're already rich. The art of preaching is this. I appreciate your gift. Because that's what makes preaching fun.
Yeah.
That we don't all preach the same.
That's amazing.
Dr. Ralph West is my favorite preacher.
He's
But
phenomenal.
do you not know how boring preaching would be if we all preached like Ralph?
This is true.
So I appreciate the Charles Stanley, the Chuck Swindoll.
Yes.
I appreciate your gift. I appreciate the black preachers who I grew up under, who would lift their voice and would at the end would have music in their voice. And here comes the organ and the drum and the keyboard to so as what we say, call and response. Can I get a witness? Or you may appreciate the preacher who just, guess what, stands behind the desk and simply never raises his voice, her voice, never breaks a sweat, but has a sound biblical doctrinal message.
Fantastic.
And so I think people who have an appreciation for preaching and the gospel will say, if he's white, if he's black, Hispanic, male or female, a kid, just makes sense. Make sense and speak to me in this current need of mine. And I could care less what color you are.
Has to be relevant.
It has to be relevant. It is what Gardner Calvin Taylor says, that the preacher has to preach with the Bible in one hand at that time, with the newspaper in the other hand.
This is so true.
That you just can't preach the gospel. How does the gospel line up with what's happening in the world today?
Exactly.
Not so much the world, but the people that you're preaching.
Yeah.
Social economic, race, politics. Well, the preacher needs to stay out of politics. If that be the case, you wouldn't have Paul's epistles.
This is 100% true.
You wouldn't have that. Paul was dealing with those people in Rome.
Yeah.
The citadel for religious power. Here he comes preaching about this Jesus. Yeah. And for the black church, voting rights, Jim Crow, is birthed in the church. Within the church. Wow. And so beyond that, the church has to, the preacher has to speak to that.
He does.
It's
funny. I think like when other preachers, and we know a few of them, that will tiptoe around all these subjects.
You can't.
It almost seems like you feel watered down, man. Just say it, bro.
A preacher can't be a coward.
Yeah.
At the same time, when you are under contract and you have elders to answer to it, a board of trustees who dangle your livelihood in your face and your benefits and say, you have to do this, or we're going to cut your check, or we're going to cut your money, we're going to fire you. Then he or she has to make a decision. Am I a slave to the check, or am I a slave to the gospel?
100%.
And do I believe that God will make a way?
He will always make a way.
Absolutely.
Now, get to that. Now, that you talk about the condition, it's phenomenal response. Now we get into the gatekeepers and the politics behind the church. I just Googled right now. I mean, just you could Google it. It says the tenure of a pastor in America is 3.6 years, 3.6 to 4 years max before they flip them. They hit next.
Before they what?
before they fire them or before they're pushed to a different assignment. This is what it says. The average length of a pastor's tenure in the American church is between 3.6 and 4 years. Many are factors that affect this, whether it's change of leadership and or resignation or just what we would consider church politics.
Because it's garbage.
Isn't that crazy?
It's garbage because doing this shouldn't be that hard. You mean tell me you're fighting? You call me to be the pastor,
Mm,
and then you say we want a vision, and then I pray, and then I seek God's face for the vision. Now I give the vision. Now you mad and want to fight the vision that you told me you wanted
yeah.
and I prayed for. And then you have several things, man. Sometimes the people who put the most money in church want to call the shots
Yeah.
because
I know all about
I
that.
put the money in, so you have to do what I say. And then, with all due respect, there are some people in church who have no clout or authority or positions outside of church. So now, once you give them a title, now I'm somebody.
Mm,
You know, I'm nobody out there. I don't run anything out there. And for some of them who are men, I don't even run my house.
oh, wow.
So now you give me a title like deacon and trustee and elder and chairman and board president.
Yeah.
Oh, I get puffed up.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to flex because I know once I leave this church, I'm going right back to my sorry, insignificant life.
Wow.
Yeah,
Mic drop moment.
yeah.
I'm going to talk on this real quick. I was in my assignment in that one my assignment in the Woodlands area, very well off, big church. And I remember, God, this is so I would never mention his name, but this is one of the most incredible things of offense that I've took. I was okay, so obviously, the pastor, I was pastoring the church as an executive pastor. I was the executive pastor for the Spanish ministry. And again, like I said, over 600 people, 1,000 people whenever we had guests. And I never forget that. There was given a person's name, and they told me, "You're going to respect this man. He is a very special member of our church, and he contributes a whole lot of money to the church.
So
So
basically,
you make time."
kiss his butt because he gives money.
Absolutely. I was
Yeah.
told, you listen to him, make sure you make time for him. If he calls you, you answer. And I remember he called me. Well, his secretary actually called me because he was a big guy. Um, it's so funny. He was from Venezuela. I will add that he was from Venezuela. He was a businessman into import and export for multiple things, especially like fruits and vegetables, whatever. It doesn't matter. He took me to his secretary called me, said, "Mr. So and so wants to meet you for lunch. He wants to invite you to lunch and he wants to have a conversation with you." I said, "Okay, cool." So we went to a local pizzeria there in the Woodlands, and I remember, I'm just I'm at the office, I'm there at the church on the office, and I go to the lunch. He pulls up and he has a notebook. I kid you not, he has a notebook. And this was before like having like a fancy iPad or something. He shows up in his notebook. He sits in his suit and he sits down. He's like, "Thank you for meeting me, Pastor. It's good to have you." He shook my hand, order whatever you want, and everything like that. He goes, "Let's talk about a few things." I said, "Okay." And he told me, "I can't stand your Spanish. It's terrible Spanish." I said, "When he opened his dialogue, that's his first conversation that came out of his mouth." And he said, I want to say this in a nice way, but your Spanish is terrible. Would you mind if I send you to Spanish classes? I'll pay for it for you to speak Spanish correctly." I was just like, I'm about to take a bite out of my pizza, man. And I was just like, yo, this how we're gonna start?
Doesn't it make you wonder what it would have been if he wouldn't have said it in a nice way?
Yeah.
Because if that's the nice way, what's the
Yeah.
mean way?
He said, look, after we prayed for the food, and this is no joke. He says, let's get started. And he goes down his list. We ain't work on your Spanish. It's terrible. It's garbage. He said, basically, he says, tu español no sirve. Hablas muy mal. No tienes educación. You don't have education to speak it. If I send you to Spanish classes, would you be okay to do that? And I'll pay for it. I was like, I didn't really know whether to be offended or to be excited. I was like, what in the world? I took my first bite out of my pizza. I was like, okay. And then he goes, okay, let's move it on. It's yes or no. Would you like me to help you with your Spanish? And I was like, remember, Mexican Spanish is totally different cultural from Venezuela, Argentina, Colombia. We do have the same, what we would consider the basis of our dialect, but we have different accents. We have different words and verbiage, and everything is different. And so I was just like, okay. And then the next thing he goes, I don't like the way you dress. If it's okay with you, would you mind if I buy you a wardrobe? I would like for you to dress nicer. I kid you not. And I was just like, what do you mean? He goes, you can't wear jeans anymore. You're on a different level. You're going to have to wear a suit. And if it's okay, I'd like to buy you a couple of suits. And I thought, okay, all right, that's good. And then he told me the last thing. I think he said a few other things that were just like, I was just like caught up in all this stuff and I'm eating. And then he goes, and the last thing, you might want to talk less. Just smile more often and talk less. And maybe you can hang out at the door and greet people and make sure that, you greet everybody. So I was like, listen to this stuff and the list of things that he gave me. And I took it to my office and I was just like, wow, let me pray on this. And I remember that one of our staff members came up to me. He goes, how did it go with the meeting with so and so? And I was like, it was interesting. And then they said, well, it was instructed from leadership up there that you do everything he tells you. And I was like, okay. He goes, he contributes. He is the most wealthiest Hispanic in the Hispanic ministry and contributes a lot, and we cannot lose him. We cannot afford to lose him. That's exactly what I was told. And I did everything he's told me, and I felt like a sellout.
Yeah, he got to go to hell from me. Absolutely. And I get it. I don't want you to feel bad about that. I get it because um that's become that is the politics of church, man. And it is so unfortunate that, you can't offend in black church, usually if it's a smaller church, the mega churches, I'm sure you have those same people. But it's normally one person, and it's because their dad was the founding pastor, or
Mm.
this family, and
Nepotism.
absolutely,
Mm.
and it is draining because you can't even do ministry because now you're saying to me, don't please the Lord, please her, please him. And now the question we ask uh, is this a church or is this the country club? Is this church or is this just all business?
Mhm.
Because now I think when it comes to stuff like that, I think, man, sometimes on Sunday morning, we talk about come to Christ, come to salvation. That's not their aim anymore.
Mhm.
Their aim is to keep the doors open. You know why? Because we got big mortgages.
Mhm.
We have hell of an overhead.
Yeah.
And we got to keep these people in here because the mortgages on this building is 50 grand a month.
Mhm.
We're on TV, we staff people. So it becomes that sense of entitlement as well.
Mm-hmm. I felt so. You ever feel like, Vic? I don't know how to explain it, but I felt so offended, Pastor. Like I felt literally like a sellout.
Man, and I really applaud you for staying for the whole conversation.
Yeah,
I really do. I applaud you for. Well, you should have ate the pizza and made them pay the bill, but
he did. He did.
yeah, and
That's for
yeah,
sure.
yes,
He did.
and you probably should have stayed long enough to get the suits. You know,
I did. I got a few suits out of
yeah,
it. Yeah, he bought me
absolutely,
a few suits, and I took Spanish lessons.
yeah,
That was sent to me.
yeah. I just think that's the politics of this stuff, which makes it's easy to believe that people quit
Mm,
because not saying that ministry is fun. It's hard work,
yeah,
but at the same time, it should be a joyful hard work. But yeah, it's tough. This is my calling, and I know it. And I get frustrated. I get tired of ministry. I get tired of people. I get tired of preaching.
Jesus himself got tired of
And
people.
I get tired of hearing about your problems. I got my own problems.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a shepherd, under shepherd. It's my calling. I know that. But at the same time, people
Mm-hmm.
and politics, nepotism, makes this hard. And so the thing is, man, listen, I'll quit. I have an earned doctorate of ministry. Some would say, and that's how they think. I'll quit this church stuff. I'll go to the academy and teach. I have a PhD in religious studies, man. I'll just go be a tenured professor somewhere because this is too much. This is just too much. Because when from a colleague today sent me some messages because he's having some issues with at his church, and he said, "Jordan, I watched your service today," and he said, "Y'all went in like it was just one of them God moments today."
Yeah, it was fire.
And he said to me, he said, "Man, um, I I I cried before I preached because now this is a job for me.
Oh wow.
I no longer have the joy of being a pastor." And I said to him, I said, "Unfortunately, I know how you feel."
So you've been there.
Absolutely. You know, um, when I pastored in Port Arthur, we were only there 2 years, and I gave myself 5. This small town.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to get to Alexandria, and God blessed me to get to Port Arthur, which was smaller than Alexandria,
Yeah,
but it was in Texas.
PA.
So I said, maybe 5 years I'll be here. I didn't go there making a lot of money,
Mm-hmm.
but I had a parsonage, so we didn't pay any bills in the house. But yet and still, man, every day I found myself being in the office. By year 2, the house that we lived in was literally our back door, the church's side door on the same grounds. I literally stopped going to church except for Wednesday and Sunday. And I was at the National Baptist Convention, and I saw the legendary Dr. Jasper Williams.
Oh my God. Yes.
And I said to him, I said, "Doc, let me ask you a question. How do you know when it's time to leave the church that you're pastoring?" He said to me in his voice, "Young man, whenever you have to make yourself go to church, it's time for you to go because you've lost your joy." And I said, "Wow." But here's the whole thing. I'm like, "God, I'm not in the fight. The church is actually growing. It's a young crowd.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an old membership. It's a young, middle-aged crowd. And they have church. They can sing. The worship is electric. The money's coming in.
Mm.
And it was time for me to go.
Mm.
So you have to recognize those signs too when it's time for you to go. Because sometimes you can stay too long
Yeah.
because out of fear.
Out of
You
fear.
stay in the boat. You're comfortable.
That's incredible. But there's so many people that they don't want to get out of the way. They're called gatekeepers, right? The ones that just
Yeah,
the
that's
old
what
guard, the
they call
old
them
guard.
publicly. I probably call them something else behind their back. But man, someone said to me a few weeks ago. He said to me, he said, Jordan, you're wondering why at this point in your life, why God has you here. Because I mean, like, dude, I'm 50 years old. I was at my former church for 19 years. I was close to retiring in the next 10 years or so. You know, could have. Probably wouldn't have, but I could have. And you tell me to organize the church in a pandemic?
Mm.
And he said to me, he said, one of the reasons why God is blessing you and is blessing your church is because you are free from the opinions of the people that you thought mattered.
Mm.
And you can actually flow and be you in Jesus and pastor how you are being led to pastor and not how your heroes and mentors think you should.
Wow. That is so heavy.
Yeah.
That's
So,
a mic drop moment, man.
and I think sometimes, man, even in church, listen, it's easy to become what you hate.
Oh yeah, I met a few, and I've been guilty
You
of that
know,
myself.
I know a lot of preachers, man, in their 60s, early 70s, 60s, who at one time they were the young preacher. And I've heard them tell stories about how old guys mistreated them and talked down to them. And now they've become what they hated. They
Yeah.
become this old, with all due respect, this old Negro preacher who thinks that you have to get their permission to do anything. And what happens with that whole gatekeeper thing is this. People are guilty of bowing to that
Yeah, they are.
because in Black culture, Black church for sure, there are certain people you say, hey man, don't make don't make don't make him mad because he can open doors for you. If you anger him, he can make a phone call, man, he can hate your ministry. And when you're
Back issue.
yeah, and when you're young and you hear that, you acquiesce to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But now, as I've aged, this is my mindset now. If me following God angers you, and if you have that much authority in the city of Houston and abroad where you can hurt my ministry, then God is a liar.
Hmm. Oh
And
yeah.
you're God and he's not. So how can I preach if God be for me, but I'm scared of you?
Oh man.
How can I declare I was young, but now I'm old. I've never seen the righteous forsaken. But I have to kiss your ring to survive.
Mm.
And the same God who called me called you, but I have to bow down to you. The devil is a lie, and you are too. So now,
100%.
if you never call me back, I'm cool with that. If I never preach for you again, I'm okay with that. If I walk by you and you turn your head, I am content with that.
Can I
Interject.
ask, Pastor, only because at the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned how it's important to look at church not just from the spiritual side, but the fact that it's also a business, right? But in like if you look at settings in corporate, like especially when you're climbing the ladder to become a CEO, vice president, anything when you're higher up, and I would consider a pastor or associate pastor something similar to that, right? Isn't there a lot of kissing the ring in those scenarios as well as you're climbing the corporate ladder? So if you're looking at it and saying, okay, well, church is church, but it's also a business, isn't there a certain amount of kissing the ring that has to happen almost as a reverence or respect to the generation that came before you?
Reverence, and you use two words: respect. Biblically speaking, reverence is for God alone. So I can respect you, not reverence you. And especially now, church is a business. Well, I'll say this: has a business side to it. But we are in the world, not of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So our practices and principles should be different. So I should hire you and promote you, not because you kiss my butt, but because you're qualified, because you have a Joseph spirit, not because you're my yes man.
Yeah. That's
So the church still can have a business side, but Christians got to be different. We have to be different. So you tell me I'm going to hire you or promote you, and I know you're a mess.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. You know,
Maybe you make
No.
bad decisions. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I know you aren't qualified for this position,
Mm-hmm.
but you feed my ego. So I hire you.
Oh man.
And guess
That's
what?
good.
I'm getting constant complaints about you. Constant complaints. HR is mad with you. Everybody else is mad with you. Constant complaints. But I won't fire you because you pack my bag. You get my water. You open the door for me. You feed my ego. So I'm gonna keep you. You ain't qualified, but I'm gonna keep you. And there is someone else who is qualified, but because they have the chutzpah to tell me what they feel in a respectful manner, I take it as a challenge. You're disrespectful. No, I just said to you, sir, I don't think that will work. But you took that
To offense.
as offense because he's going to say, yeah, pass, it's going to work.
Mm.
See, he feeds me. And understand this, you never give people power who want it. They're dangerous. They're dangerous. People who jockey for position in church, they're dangerous, man. Because sometimes the church is guilty of hiring people and putting them in spiritual positions based upon their worldly resume. Because you teach at the academy, U of H, TSU, Prairie View, doesn't mean you can teach Sunday school
Yes.
or vacation Bible school or small groups.
Well, in most cases, you get a successful business, and oh yeah, you can run our finances.
Absolutely. And,
You be on the board of our
and they
executive.
are demonic
Wow.
because more churches have gotten in trouble, more pastors have gotten in trouble because of the resume and you're your CFO at your business, so I'm going to make you my CFO. But here's the whole problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
Did I pray about it?
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Did I pray about it? And if I didn't pray about it, watch this. Now, why am I upset when you give me trouble? Nick, if we're doing a podcast, cut your phone off. We're doing a podcast. Get off speakerphone, please. So with that being said, because we heard everything she said. Yeah. Put it to you next time now. You just stay right there. So now I'm angry because I put somebody who was qualified academically
Mm-hmm.
and in the world at the same time, they aren't spiritual.
Yeah. And then they try to, what happens is they try to carry them through the non-spiritual journey, if you will, and they will apply the non-spiritual / corporate elements and say, well, it's good for the church. We need this. We need this. Or they will use that, I guess, that excuse, if you will.
Anything not bathed in prayer prior isn't good for the church.
I agree.
Anyone hired without prayer isn't good for the church.
Oh, come on. Wow. So it's not even a factor of we would consider it reform or acceptance, but you just call it out the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you take it as you would if the shoe fits, right?
Absolutely. Because you're the CEO of some Fortune 500 company doesn't mean when the church becomes a mega church or whatever, I can make you the CEO of the church. This is still spiritual. This is God. This is God. And when you take prayer out of the equation, you have chaos.
Yeah.
So now why are you upset with the chaos that you created?
And blame God for it.
And blame God for it.
Come on, man. Come on.
That's what Adam did to Eve.
Exactly. Is the woman you gave me.
Exactly.
Is what you gave me. Is like you gave me this problem. Like, hold up. Yeah.
But the command was given to you, not her.
The authority was given to you.
And you were too much of a coward to put her in the place. I love you though.